Welcome to another episode of Well, Don't Tell the Kids. I'm Janet Lee, your host, and today I'm speaking with Karla Harr. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Karla.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Karla joins us from Washington, D.C., or a suburb of, where she and her husband, Brian, are raising their family. But I see from your background that you didn't start out here. You started out near Salt Lake City in Utah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I was raised in Salt Lake City and went to college there and then left for law school, went to the Bay Area.
Your bachelor's level, you studied psychology. Is that right?
That's right.
And so how were you attracted to that major?
So I've always been interested in sort of how we function, depending on how we were raised, things that affect how we relate to other people, and psychology was an interesting field. Apparently, my personality led my advisor to focusing me towards law instead of continuing my studies in psychology. He thought I would be a better advocate by pursuing law. So that's kind of how I made the jump from psychology into law, still with a focus on figuring out how we work within ourselves, within our society, and now within the laws that our society imposes.
You were then very fortunate to have that kind of a mentor or advisor towards graduation when you're contemplating what to do next.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, college advisors are really key for our kids as they go into that next step of education, institutionalized education. And if you're fortunate enough to have someone that sort of follows you along during your 4 years or however many years you happen to be figuring out that first path, the person should get to know you pretty well and help you figure out if this is the path you should continue on or maybe detour, try something else.
Yes, well, I think you were very fortunate. It doesn't happen for everybody. Let me tell you. And then you mentioned you earned your JD from the Golden Gate University School of Law in San Francisco. It's in public interest law. What is that specifically, and how were you drawn into that? I suppose, is that something you just started off on day one? Oh, I'm going to do public interest law, or was it something that evolved?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I think it wasn't a leap because of the things that I did in undergrad. I worked at the Rape Crisis Center, and I worked doing volunteer work with kids. I kind of wanted to continue working within my community for social justice issues, things like that. And certainly being a girl from Utah, arriving in the Bay Area, San Francisco in particular, it was a shock to me at how many things really make up public interest. What is public interest? There were so many possibilities, different types of law. I remember one of the first classes I saw as an elective was sexual gender identity in the law. I'm like, what the heck is that? And there was also domestic violence law, and there were issues related to homeless advocacy and things like that. And immediately, your first year, you don't get to choose what you might really be interested in because you have to get rid of all those basics. But later on, second, third year, you really get your time to explore other avenues of law and do internships and volunteer and things like that. So Golden Gate, I don't know if it still does, but it had a consortium with Hastings School of Law. So we would go over and take a few classes at Hastings and that were more specifically oriented towards public interest. And then at the end of your tenure at the law school, you had this additional little piece of paper that said public interest law.
You immersed yourself more in how to serve community, and then I see you, classic style, you spent a couple of years with the Peace Corps in Guatemala.
Right.
Yeah,
so that was sort of weird. That should have happened between undergrad and law school. If you want to take the traditional path towards life, but I did not. I usually have not taken the traditional path, and my third year in law school had me questioning everything and whether or not I even at that point had the energy to go into a bar review intensive course and take a bar. I just, midway through my last year of law school, started to question, what am I doing? Where am I going? And cliche as it sounds, a Peace Corps commercial came on the television at like 12 o'clock at night, and I wrote down the number and called him the next day. So
watching TV. Exactly. You order all these strange infomercial things and end up in Guatemala.
Exactly. And the day of my graduation from law school, I was given my placement. So it was a great celebration.
Thinking back to that time, could you maybe just share a significant experience that happened there, or any particular kind of story? I can imagine there must have been hundreds of stories in that time, but something that stuck
in the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really, my 2 years plus in country in Guatemala was amazing. Just being with other like-minded people from the U.S. of all ages, all walks of life, and being there to give and take and learn and share was great. There are a million stories. I don't think that there was anything specifically that said to me, oh, I'm going to practice immigration law when I get out of this. It did renew my dedication to, I'm going to go back, I'm going to take the bar, and I'm going to figure out how all of this and what I'm doing now in Guatemala is going to serve me in the future. And when I did, I left 2 months early or a month early from my service so I could get back in time to take the California bar in February. So I left in December and went back and studied, took the bar, passed it. And my husband, I met him in the Peace Corps. He came back and he's like, "Oh, honey, guess what? We're going to Maryland because I'm going to go to public. Oh, it's a program, the Shriver Peace Worker Program is a program set up for former Peace Corps volunteers." And so he said, "We're not going to stay in California, at least right now. So sorry you took the California bar, but we're going to go to Maryland." And I said, "Okay, Maryland's fine." We went to Maryland, and I was in the summer, and I was wearing nylons and a suit after living in Guatemala, trying to find a job in these corporate buildings, and they would look at my resume, and they were just like, what are you doing here? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, I agree, it doesn't, but I got to pay these student loans now. And I found myself volunteering for Catholic Charities one weekend. They needed Spanish speakers because they had a bunch of Salvadorans and Guatemalans who were applying for asylum. This was in the mid-'90s, and all of a sudden the light bulb went on. Ding, ding, ding. Oh my God, this is what I want to do. This is what I meant to do. And being able to assist specifically the Guatemalans with their applications for asylum, knowing what they had lived through, knowing their stories, understanding their language,
I'm getting chills.
Was huge. Yeah, it was huge. It's just, it's crazy. It does make you wonder how much of a plan is already set in place for you, and how much of a plan you need to make for yourself.
Well, it sounds like the couple of things that you just recounted, that you had that time for reaffirmation. You just were in country, as you say, or reinforced what you might have been thinking. So,
right. Here's yet another population of people that I can figure out how to advocate for and be a part of their transition into U.S. life.
Summarizing where your path has led, you went through the different ranks in law practices, from staff attorney to project attorney to solo practitioner.
And now senior attorney at a firm.
So it sounds like you just followed this path of immigration law. And have you seen over the years that this field of immigration law has changed, and how is it?
I mean, immigration law is exciting because it's not stagnant, right? There are constantly policy changes. What we see is sort of a shift in enforcement and family value, from I guess, enforcement perspective to family unification. back and forth depending on who's in the White House. And sometimes those lines get blurred also depending on who's in the White House and how close they are to leaving the White House, things like that. So since 1995 when I started, and there have been moments of sheer panic in every single regime change. And the most recent obviously has us all very concerned because there definitely there's more of a priority for enforcement, for rounding up and shipping out. And we haven't seen this emphasis before, this much emphasis. In fact, I've been practicing in front of 4 or 5 immigration judges in Arlington since 1995. Sometimes there's been 5 and sometimes there hasn't, but it's been the same group more or less all these years. Well, with the new administration, we are looking to go from 5 to somewhere between 18 and 22 judges.
What? I'm sorry.
So that just tells you right there where the priorities are for immigration right now, because the powers that be envision that there are going to be so many people in the courts in deportation proceedings that they've got to be able to handle that. So they're hiring judges, they're hiring trial attorneys, and for the most part, these people that take these positions as administrative law judges or members of the Department of Justice for Executive Office of Immigration Review or the Chief Counsel's Office, they come from within the government. So there's not a lot of people from the private bar, from the nonprofit sector that go into these positions. So things are changing. The immigration court in Arlington is going from these 4 or 5 courtrooms on one floor to taking up several floors. They're in the middle of this huge construction project to start utilizing all the floor space that they need to accommodate the numbers of people that are being placed in and being pushed through the deportation system.
Were you at Dulles Airport when change in the travel policy occurred?
Yeah, the first one, right.
Any observations about when you were there? I mean, what do you say to families?
So it's interesting. We didn't have a chance. We didn't really talk to any families that were being specifically affected at that moment. The time that I spent down there, Connolly and my representative, I'm spacing on his name, he came down and they had a copy of the injunction from the Alexandria court judge saying you have to let these people through. And the head of CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol man, stood there and told him, no, we're not going to let you back. No, I can't tell you if we have detainees. No, we can't tell you anything. And this refusal of the government to be transparent in what they were doing was what was scary to me. Like, if they're not going to listen to our elected officials, not going to honor an order from a judge, what do we have to worry about? A whole lot. So I was worried. Things have calmed down a bit. The injunctions have taken on different forms, where they are in the judicial process in the different districts.
It's this question of straddling the Supreme Court now. You touched on the transparency. I was going to ask what you might view as a priority for our society globally or just nationally to keep growing or changing for the better.
Yeah, I mean, don't we have to start with ourselves, right? So one of the things that I'm trying to process through all this is my immediate reaction to all of this was just this us versus you, and we, you, us, them, all of that. And as I started getting involved with my community and realizing we've got to build bridges. And one of the things that it starts with, I think, is just being kinder to each other and being willing to accept that somebody has a different belief or opinion than you and do your best to talk and explain where you're coming from and why you have the perspective you do, and listen to why they have the perspective. And, I guess ideally there's some common ground somewhere in all of that, but I don't know. It's really a difficult time, isn't it?
But I have heard that from other folks. And also, you just touched on the dialogue piece of it. I think that's coming out to be a tool that's really going to move us forward, if there can be some dialogue that leads to understanding. Well, I was going to ask for advice for the young, but do you have any interests outside of the law?
Yeah, no, I do. You and I share an interest in the arts. I do have an interest in the arts, in dance, and in music, and my children and even my husband, they are all involved in those areas, so that keeps us all busy and also feeds our soul, which I think is really important. I feel like most recently when you were talking about advice to our young, this is the crazy part, because as I said earlier, I've never really gone the path that people expected or thought. And now I'm seeing that in my children as well. Both of us, you and I both have talented dancers. Our daughters are great dancers, and my daughter graduated not this past June, but the year before, and was on path for college like everybody else, and took a detour and ended up is dancing professionally now. And she may not go to undergrad for a few more years. And I've watched her year unfold this past year, and I watched my son, who's headed into his junior year, and I think, you know what, we do need to allow our kids to have a gap year if it can work out. I think this race to get out of high school and to get out of college and to move on to the next academic tier, I'm not sure if that's the path everyone needs to be so focused on anymore. At least for us, I'm hoping that my son Gabriel will take a gap year. I've encouraged him to get his musician friends and go down to New Orleans and become street musicians, because I think there you can make some money, and at the same time volunteer X number of hours per week with a nonprofit down there, and do that for the school year before you move on to college, something like that. But I think we just need to have a growing sense of community and take some of the pressure off our kids they don't necessarily need to go the traditional route to be important members of our community and to be healthy and satisfied with themselves.
Well, I've spoken with a couple of folks in the performing arts arena, and it's actually a common thread through all my guests that there has to be something from which to draw. So I wanted to thank you again for just taking the time to talk about your path.
Well, thanks for having me share it. It's been a nice trip down memory lane, and it's a pleasure to talk to you, Janet.
I'll keep an eye out for your budding stars in dance and music. Okay, that's about all the time we have for now. Thank you again, Karla, and thank you all for listening. My guest has been Karla Harr, and I'm Janet Lee. So please stay tuned for more episodes of Well, Don't Tell the Kids.